What would you do if a mall security guard publicly humiliated and mocked your 18-year-old daughter for telling the truth about who her mother was? Only to discover moments later that her mother is actually a federal judge who's about to walk through those doors and unleash the most devastating verbal takedown he's ever experienced. Where are you watching from? Comment below before we dive into today's story. And please subscribe to this channel, it's free. He thought he could embarrass an 18-year-old girl in front of a crowd. He laughed when she said her mother was a judge. But when her mom appeared, the laughter died instantly. It was just another Saturday afternoon at Riverside Mall in Phoenix, Arizona. Nothing special. Just three young friends hanging out, carrying drinks and checking out stores. But sometimes, the most ordinary days can flip upside down in seconds. Anita Johnson was with her two best friends, Damon Carter and Jasmine Williams. Damon had just bought some new Air Jordans, and Jasmine was teasing him about how long he took to choose. They were doing typical teenage stuff, taking selfies, laughing, having fun. That's when their joy caught the wrong person's attention. Brad Mitchell was a 46-year-old security guard with gray hair and a mean streak a mile wide. He worked part-time at the mall, and today he was on a serious power trip. As he walked near the food court, his eyes locked onto the three friends. Maybe it was their laughter. Maybe it was their skin color. Maybe it was both. But Brad decided these kids were trouble. "Hey, you three," he barked, his voice echoing through the mall. "What do you think you're doing here?" Jasmine looked confused. "We're shopping, sir." Brad shook his head like he'd already made up his mind. "Don't play games with me. You've been standing here for 20 minutes. That's loitering." Damon held up his shopping bag with shaking hands. "I just bought these shoes. You can ask the cashier." But Brad wasn't interested in proof. His hand rested near his belt. Not on his weapon, but close enough to send a message. He towered over them like a schoolyard bully. "Don't get smart with me," Brad sneered. "I said you're loitering. Do I need to escort you out?" Anita felt her heart pounding, but she kept her voice steady. "Sir, we're not doing anything wrong. My mom is meeting me here in a few minutes." Brad's eyes lit up with cruel amusement. "Oh, really? And who's mommy? Maybe she can teach you some respect." Anita hesitated. She hadn't planned to say it, but his smirk pushed her over the edge. "My mother is Judge Patricia Johnson. She's a federal judge downtown." The silence lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then Brad threw back his head and burst into laughter. Not a chuckle, but a full, mocking laugh that made heads turn throughout the mall. "A federal judge," he wheezed, slapping his knee. "That's the funniest thing I've heard all week. Kid, you could tell me your mom's the president, and it wouldn't change anything." Anita's face burned with shame. Around them, shoppers began to slow down, drawn by the raised voices. Some whispered, others stared openly. With every second that passed, Brad's laughter felt like a spotlight on her humiliation. "This is so wrong," Jasmine whispered. Damon stepped forward, his voice tight with anger. "She's telling the truth. You don't have to talk to her like that." But Brad only laughed harder, feeding off the growing audience. "What's wrong? Can't handle authority? Maybe you should learn some respect." The crowd was growing, 10, maybe 15 people now, pretending to shop but really watching the drama unfold. Brad leaned down close to Anita, his voice dropping to a cruel whisper. "Listen, sweetheart. You can spin whatever fairy tale you want, but you're still just a kid I caught loitering. Nobody in this mall cares who you think you are." But what Brad didn't know was that Judge Patricia Johnson was already walking through the parking lot, heading straight for the mall entrance. The distinct sound of heels on tile echoed from the entrance, sharp, deliberate, and getting louder. Some people in the crowd turned first, then whispered. Heads began to shift toward the escalators. And there she was. Judge Patricia Johnson wasn't the tallest woman in the room, but her presence filled it instantly. Black blazer, perfect posture, and an expression sharp enough to cut glass. The air seemed to bend around her authority. Brad was still busy lecturing the teenagers, but Anita's heart leaped as she saw her mother's familiar silhouette moving closer. "She's here," Anita whispered to herself. But Brad didn't notice. He was still laughing. "Oh, I bet she is. Any second now, right? Well, I'm standing right here waiting." That's when Patricia's voice cut through the noise like a blade, calm, firm, and unmistakable. "Is there a problem here?" The crowd parted as if making room for royalty. Brad turned, and his smirk faltered when he locked eyes with the woman approaching. He froze for just a second too long, and in that pause, everything changed. "Ma'am, these kids have been loitering," Brad said, his voice suddenly less confident. "I was handling it." Patricia stopped a few feet from him, her eyes razor-sharp. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Handling it by mocking them in public? By threatening to call backup on 3 teenagers standing by a store? The crowd stirred. A woman in a red sweater whispered to her friend, "She sounds serious." Anita stood taller now, her mother's presence giving her strength. "Mom, I told him you were coming. He laughed at me." Patricia's gaze never left Brad. "She told you I was her mother?" Brad cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Ma'am, kids say a lot of things when they're in trouble. I didn't take it seriously." "Clearly," Patricia said flatly. The onlookers could feel the shift. Phones that had been raised secretly were now lifted boldly. It wasn't every day you saw a federal judge face off with mall security. "With all due respect, ma'am," Brad said, trying to regain control, "I was just doing my job. These kids were causing a scene." Patricia's eyebrows rose slightly. "A scene? The only scene I see is you mocking my child for telling the truth. What exactly about their behavior justified public humiliation?" The crowd murmured agreement. "Exactly," someone called out. Another shopper added, "They were just standing there." Brad's jaw tightened. He hadn't expected pushback from the bystanders. They were loitering. That's against mall policy. Patricia's tone remained steady, but got sharper. Questioning is one thing. Belittling an 18-year-old girl in front of strangers is another. "Did you really laugh at her when she told you who her mother was?" Everyone waited. Brad shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to the phones recording him. Finally, he muttered, "She made a claim that sounded unlikely." I reacted, "Unlikely?" Patricia repeated, turning briefly to the crowd. "My daughter told the truth, and instead of treating her with dignity, he turned her honesty into a spectacle. That's not security. That's abuse of authority." Gasps rippled through the bystanders. Someone clapped softly. Another voice said, "She's absolutely right." "Look, I didn't know who she was," Brad said defensively. "I was just doing my job." Patricia took a step closer. "Then perhaps you should learn how to do your job without degrading children. Authority does not give you the right to belittle anyone." The crowd was fully engaged now. Some nodded in agreement. Others whispered into their phones as they streamed live. The mall manager, a short, nervous man, rushed over. "What's going on here?" Patricia spoke before Brad could answer. "What's going on is your security officer publicly mocked my daughter and laughed when she told the truth about who her mother was." The manager's face went pale. "Judge Johnson," he stammered, "I had no idea." "Now you do," Patricia said firmly. "Are you going to apologize, or do I need to file a formal complaint?" Brad's face flushed red. Every option looked like defeat. Finally, he forced out, "Sorry, kid." The words were flat and hollow. The crowd sensed it immediately. Patricia didn't let it slide. "That's not an apology. That's avoidance. Look at her. Say her name, and mean it. Brad shifted uncomfortably. Anita Johnson, I apologize. I shouldn't have laughed at you. But Brad's pride wasn't finished. Even after the forced apology, he tried one last time to salvage his authority. Judge Johnson, with all due respect, you're making this a bigger deal than it needs to be. I addressed a security issue. Patricia's expression turned ice cold. A security issue? You publicly laughed at a young woman for standing near a shoe store. If that's your idea of a security threat, then your judgment is the real problem here. The crowd reacted audibly. Someone whispered, "She's destroying him." Your defense is prejudice, Patricia continued. Because you've seen others cause problems. You assume any group of teenagers must be trouble. That's not policing, that's profiling. Brad faltered, his mouth opening and closing without sound. The crowd recorded every second. Authority is not armor, Patricia said, her voice carrying to everyone watching. It's not a shield to use against those weaker than you. Authority exists to serve, and right now, everyone here sees how poorly you've used yours. Additional security arrived, but it was too late. Brad's authority had crumbled completely. With a final glare at the crowd, he stepped back, defeated. The mall manager, sweating under all those recording phones, quickly intervened. "Officer Mitchell, please step away." A wave of relief rippled through the bystanders. Some clapped quietly. Others just exhaled like they'd been holding their breath. Patricia turned to her daughter. "Are you all right?" Anita nodded, tears in her eyes. Not from shame this time, but from gratitude. "Yeah, now I am." Later, as they sat on a bench away from the crowd, Patricia held her daughter's hand. "I felt so small, Mom," Anita whispered. "Like I wasn't even a person when he laughed at me." "You weren't small," Patricia said firmly. "You were brave. You stood your ground when someone tried to diminish you. But it felt like nothing I said mattered until you showed up." Patricia squeezed her hand. "That wasn't about you. That was about him. People like Brad live on assumptions. They decide who you are before you even speak. That's not your failure. That's his." Damon spoke up quietly. "He looked so powerless when you called him out." "That's the power of truth," Patricia replied. "It doesn't need volume or force. Once it's spoken, it cannot be silenced." As they drove home, Anita reflected on what had happened. The confrontation had left scars, but it had also left something else, strength. "Do things like this ever stop?" she asked her mother. "They don't stop on their own," Patricia answered. "Change comes when people hold others accountable. What happened today matters not just for us, but for everyone who witnessed it." That night, Anita fell asleep thinking about her mother's words. Authority unchecked can humiliate, but accountability, when demanded, can restore dignity. What happened at Riverside Mall wasn't unique. Stories like this happen everywhere. To kids who don't have a federal judge for a mother, whose voices are silenced, whose truth is laughed at until it breaks them. But this time was different. This time, truth stood up to power and won. The lesson is clear. Never let someone's assumptions define you. Never let their laughter shrink you. When arrogance tries to silence you, stand tall. Because your truth, will always outlast their mockery. Remember, respect is not optional. Dignity is not negotiable. And when challenged by truth, arrogance always crumbles.